I was given a book at the age of 6 on bird migration. And, how could they migrate these long distances? How did they navigate over oceans? The big question, if you want to put it well, I was a boy in the 30s, was what is life? How do we exist without God telling us what to do, keeping everything in order? When you're surrounded by smart people, stay quiet. There's some people, they can be either dumb or bright, but they just feel they have to say something about everything. And I've never been that person. I would rather find my own unique thing that other people haven't got to yet. So I realized that the person who solved the structure might be the person who first understood what a gene was, or how a gene acted, and therefore that was clearly going to be very important.
Do you remember what you felt when you were sitting in the Cavendish that Saturday morning with the cardboard bases and you saw the base pairing? Were you elated?
It's a little too good not to be true. Yeah. It was a question, the next week could we actually build the model? And it was easy to build, in that sense. Often when you explain an idea to other people, they try and fight back and say you haven't got the answer. Whereas this was what, when people saw our answer, they all liked it. They wanted it to be true. People know if this is true, this is very important. My career was based on unrealistic expectations. I just hope there can be more people who just want things to happen fast.
You've been known as a scientist, an author, an educator, and a public figure. If we take each of these in turn, and let's start with the science. You first became interested in science through your father and bird watching?
Yes, I was given a book at the age of 6 on bird migration. And, how could they migrate these long distances? How did they navigate over oceans? The big question, if you want to put it well, I was a boy in the 30s, was what is life? How do we exist without God telling us what to do, keeping everything in order? I was certainly aided in my upbringing by the fact that my father really lived by reason. You did things more or less because there was a logical thought rather than people yelling at each other or, authority figures. So I never saw my father as an authority figure. It was just, he was a symbol of someone who knew something.
How old were you when you went to the University of Chicago?
I was 15.
By the time you'd finished at Chicago, you had changed from natural history to being more interested in genetics and, if one might say, harder sciences.
Yeah, I was not really interested in genetics per se. I was interested in what is life and where does the instruction book for life, which, the simplest answer is the instruction book in our chromosomes. What was the gene and what was the relationship between genes and the proteins? It was a relatively new field. Proteins were only really being isolated in the 20s and 30s by chemistry. Life seemed to be a question of chemistry.
And were you, like other people, influenced by Schrodinger's book, What is Life?
Yes. You sort of posed the question, how do you copy a gene? But I think it really goes back, was what is life was sort of the biggest question facing biology. So of course we all believed in Darwin, but It just said life started with maybe a single cell and evolved in more complicated forms. And Darwin sort of described that very well. But then the question is, what was the first form of life, and what gave you the power to, a cell to copy itself, or at a smaller level of the gene to copy itself?
So where did you start looking to pursue those ideas?
I was very aware of Caltech, and they had a famous chemist, Linus Pauling, who was interested in life. Caltech had just recruited the head of its biology division, George Beadle, who had done experiments which then were called one gene, one enzyme. Caltech was, interested in what were the big molecules like. So I applied there to go to graduate school, but I was turned down. I don't think they thought they had much doubt as to whether I belonged there. I had really no training in math, and really all my recommendations were that I was an enthusiastic boy bird watcher. And that didn't sound like, I would bring anything to the table at Caltech. I think, so I was told to apply to Indiana, and they accepted me.
So were you influenced by the fact that Herman Muller and Salvador Luria were at Indiana?
There were Tracy Sonnenborn and Luria, and then there was quite a good cytologist, Ralph Cleland. But the main thing was that by being with Luria, I got associated with Max Delbruck and what was the phage group, people who thought the simplest form of life were bacterial viruses, because they were viruses, but they didn't multiply in plants, they multiplied in bacteria, so you could do experiments relatively fast.
And that was the time of your first coming to Cold Spring Harbor.
Yes, I came in the
65
summer
years
of
ago.
48.
I think you once described your PhD thesis as rather boring, or
It
very
wasn't
boring,
boring.
unexciting.
I was excited doing it, but when I got done with it, there was nothing I discovered which anyone else need know. There was a book by an English physicist, Action and Radiation on Cells, D.H. Lee. And the idea was that you might guess the size of the gene by seeing what sort of window they presented to ionizing radiation. But so he was making guesses as the sizes of the genes, and that intrigued me.
But you chose to go a different way. I mean, you decided to move away from these rather indirect ways of studying the gene to trying to understand it biochemically. And Luria recommended that you go to Herman Caulcott.
I think they thought my education should be broadened to include biochemistry, which, from my viewpoint, meant I really should learn more chemistry. But when I went to Copenhagen, I discovered that Caulcott really, though he had taken the bacterial virus course at Cold Spring Harbor in the summer of 1945, as a biochemist, he was interested in how you made small molecules, the nucleoside precursors of the nucleotides, and I realized I could do that for a couple of years, and I would be nowhere ever close to finding out what the gene was like. So I was trying to, in Copenhagen, I did the experiment to look to see if there were two forms of DNA, and the result was there was no evidence for two forms. But we didn't know any more about DNA as a result of my experiment than if I hadn't done it. So again, it was one of these sort of papers that might have interested 10 people. I had met highly intelligent people in Cold Spring Harbor and in some in Caltech. So I was moving among, what you could say the top 1% of people, of scientists. I learned that even this 1%, they were at the top. For the most part, they didn't know how to make the big step forward. But they, were honest about that. And I just moved in a world that I was very comfortable in.
They must have seen something in you, even though you were a naive, young doctoral?
I think probably they saw that I was better educated than other people. I was sort of obsessive about finding the answer. I didn't seem to show much interest in anything except the big questions.
The weather in Copenhagen wasn't very good, and you leapt at the chance to go to Naples with Calcar.
Yes.
But the weather there wasn't very good either, as I recall.
Well, one thing I've learned, if you want to find out things, you've got to travel. You can't expect that new results are going to originate where you're staying. By the time you would read them after they're published as an article, it's no longer a hot news. So I wanted to be near fire.
And when you went to Cambridge, you were talking about being amongst the top 1% of people. And one of your aphorisms is never be the smartest person in the room. And presumably when you arrived at the Cavendish in 1950, I guess, you were surrounded by smart people.
Yes. And, you know, when you're surrounded by smart people, stay quiet. You know, there's some people, I mean, they can be either dumb or bright, but they just feel they have to say something about everything. And I've never been that person, you know. I would rather find my own unique thing that other people haven't got to yet.
Maurice Wilkins' X-ray photo of DNA was an important fact to you at that moment when you saw it in Naples.
Well, it just said the structure wasn't fuzzy. That it was a helix, but exactly what helix and what atoms were next to each other. And then the other thing I got from that, actually someone was trying to solve the structure. So I realized the person who solved the structure might be the person who first understood what a gene was or how a gene acted, and therefore that was clearly going to be very important. So, but you know, it goes back to double saying don't do something that doesn't have the potentiality of a big payoff.
So do you think, stepping aside a little bit from the chronology, do you feel that's been one of your major successes? That you can, to be able to see both big problems and big problems that are solvable?
Yeah, suddenly I'm now obsessive about the essence of type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is like DNA. That's big. Really big. And people don't understand it. So I would like to, you know, people believe that I can think, because, you know, it was thinkers were, you know, it wasn't handsome people, we were thinkers. Those are the people that, you know, changed the world.
Your personality is very different from Francis Crick's. Francis talked incessantly by all accounts, but presumably to some
Even
purpose.
though we came from different, you know, totally different backgrounds, by the time we got together, we really had very strict concordance, you know. Francis would try and be intelligent about more things than I would. You know, I would limit myself. Whereas Francis was trying to, every person who talked to him, he wanted to solve their problem. Whereas I just wanted to solve the DNA, and I didn't care about anything else. So in that sense, Francis only became really focused on DNA when he saw the double helix.
So did you and he hit it off immediately?
Yes. You know, we both wanted to do something fundamental in science. But we really wanted to, we were motivated by, we wanted to be the first to solve an intellectual problem, and then, you know, maybe we get a job afterwards. Certainly, I was so young, I didn't feel under pressure. Francis, you know, he had 2 children or students, you know, and so in that sense, he had less freedom than I did.
I think many people might think that you had a very smooth path to discovering the double helix, But in fact, you had two quite serious missteps, didn't you, in coming up with models? Do you have any reflections on the importance of having mistakes or not letting them?
If you really know how science is done, most of your new ideas aren't right. And in reality, you know, if you have one idea a year, that's colossal. So it doesn't mean you're not trying to do things in between, but it's just, you know, you're not the only person who's thought about it. And some things and reflections are much easier. Effectively insolvable at the time. You don't know why they're insolvable, but there's some key fact which, until you know it, you just can't focus the right way. And so, you know, there's a lot of hard work and slogging in addition to, you know, moments of great insight.
Talking a moment of great insight, do you remember what you felt when you were sitting in the Cavendish that Saturday morning with the cardboard bases and you saw the base pairing? Were you elated?
It's a little too good not to be true. Yeah. And you know, there's a question, you know, the next week could we actually build the model? And it was easy to build. I mean, in that sense. Often when you explain an idea to other people, they try and fight back and say you haven't got the answer. Whereas this was what, when people saw our answer, they all liked it. They wanted it to be true. People know if this is true, this is very important. I think my first book, or my textbook, you know, the question is, what is life? I thought, well, write a book called This Is Life. You know, simple. So I think I want to initially write a companion piece to Schrodinger's book. It's influenced me. And then I realized that it was better if you put in background and prepared the people, not start with the double helix, but lead up to it.
How did you come up with the style of molecular biology, the gene, you know, concept heads? And
I thought, if you're taking notes while I was a student, you can't think about what they're telling you. So the whole point is idiotic. You can't enjoy the lecture. All you're doing is you're a stenographer. And so I passed out notes, and then I think I had, you know, main conclusions from the lecture, and so that would be the main conclusion. You know, put the conclusion first. I thought it was easier rather than the facts leading to the conclusion. Because often, you know, why do you want to read the paragraph unless you sort of get a preview? After I did it, it became widely popular. But at the time, I didn't think I was doing anything new. I was just being a good teacher. You know, I was just trying to ask, what's the best way to learn? So I tried to write it insofar as possible, sort of not a collection of observations, but a thoughtful reflection on the observation.
well, your second book, The Double Helix, was a sensation for presenting a style of science that had never been described before.
Yeah, but I was just describing life. I mean, as it existed. It seemed to me I was reflecting reality, and most, you know, books don't reflect reality. They're all following an authority, which when you get down to it, because they don't want disapproval of the people on top that you don't follow what they say. You couldn't be like other people and actually make any progress, and therefore there were going to be that some people would be uncomfortable because you were saying to these people, you know, what you're saying is crap. So I said that yesterday at the meeting. You know, someone had said something. It just wasn't true. You know, it was conventional wisdom, but it was wrong. And I got up and said, this is crap. You know, if you really look at it, I think much of medicine is just following authority. as you don't really know what to do, and so everyone does it. And so that there may be greater penalties for being different in medicine than there were penalties at the University of Chicago for just saying, I don't believe it. I think it's essential to try and train students to question ideas.
But do you think you can train students to think like that, or do you feel it's some more inherent part of someone's personality to question rather than accept?
I just know I really like Leo Szilard because there was just something about Leo and also George Galoff. These people they were their own person, and they weren't trying to be like someone else. Whereas, certainly when I first came to Cold Spring Harbor, I wanted to be like Max Delbruck. I wanted to look like him. I wanted to talk like, because I just felt this is my idea of the ideal scientist. Then, within 3 or 4 years, I realized that no, I didn't want to be like him at all.
What was that story that if Max told you your idea was good, you knew it was bad?
Yes.
What do you tell our graduate students? What do you tell our graduate students when they come? What advice do you give them?
My feeling is they just don't know enough. And that may be because the universe of facts that I thought I should know when I was 20 years old was pretty small, whereas now, 50,000 papers on P53, and you still don't know what it does. Now, how many of those should you read? Clearly, not most of them. And, but I still feel that I've generally been successful in life, not really because I'm clever or think faster, but I just know more than other people. I really know more. So now I'm not aided by the fact that, I'm computer illiterate, so I never Google anything. I'd have to ask someone to Google something for me. I probably get now into real trouble. Because I haven't learned the facts I don't know, which...
But someone will tell you.
Sometimes it's not fast enough. You can waste so much time. I think what really does aid science is conversations among intelligent people, where they really test ideas against other people. And it's so easy to be fuzzy talking to yourself. But when you got to talk to someone else, suddenly you got to be precise.
I mean, is this one of the reasons why you've been so almost obsessive about having meetings and courses and writing books?
I go into the assumption I'm not going to persuade most people. You hope if you give a lecture, maybe there are 1 or 2 people young who, are looking for some new way. So you want some converts. And if you don't get any converts, you'll probably fail, because, you got to prove your ideas. And you want the converts who really, just are not there to idolize you, but to have their own minds. Yeah. You really have to have very bright people as your friends.
This is a recurring theme of this conversation, Jim, always having bright people around you.
Yeah, because they're the ones who criticize you, and you'll take them seriously.
Think back in the early 70s when Nixon's war on cancer was underway. You became very critical of of NCI and its strategies,
Ah.
and you didn't earn any friends by saying so.
Yeah, but I think I said it. You should put cancer research where they're bright people, not sick patients. And so if it's in a hospital setting, the primary responsibility is the patient, not the development of new ideas. You know, early on, you know, it was our hope, you know, you get real cancer research into Caltech. The place where we really got it into was MIT. And MIT is, you know, never stopped after they created their cancer center in an old candy factory that Luria was the first head of in '74. So that was, and I went there and I said, you guys are really doing it sensibly. You're taking a difficult problem and putting it with people who are trained to work with difficult problems, not in a medical setting. And I feel the same today, that you know, cancer drugs should probably come out of a chemistry department, not out of a hospital.
And then some years later, there was the recombinant DNA controversy, which is still around us these days with, you know, genetically modified organisms. And you had a change of heart about that because you signed the original letter, the Paul Berg letter that went to Science.
You couldn't quantitate the danger. So there was no way to know what the response should be. And so, you know, that's why this precautionary principle, you shouldn't move ahead until you know it's safe. I would move ahead until it's shown to be unsafe. Then you might stop. So when I say it this way, I just, you know, find these people just aren't experienced. They just don't know how a man is evolved. You'll never have a risk-free world because it's too complicated to know whether they're going to be risks. I mean, we won the battle. Don Fredrickson at NIH, I think he was head of it. You know, I really forget who was the. We were allowed to move ahead.
Yeah, it was Fredrickson.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, then it was Jim Weingarten who got the Human Genome Project. So those were the two times when I felt I had to be a public figure. But you know, now they wanted you to label food that has recombinant DNA origins. Complete waste of money. So you know, all I conclude is, you know, Democrats are as dumb as Republicans.
Why did you take on the Human Genome Project?
I just thought we needed to know the complexity of the cell and what it was. And who would have guessed there are 500 ubiquitin ligases, or, you know, all these kinases, you know. So we had to know, you know, what we were. And the Human Genome Project would, in a sense, define the normal cell, define the boundaries of the cancer cell. These are sort of issues, you know, and issues of public health. You just can't have the public make, because they don't know enough. And decisions have to be limited to people who are qualified to make the decision. And, you know, within limits, we say, well, medical decisions, you have to have an MD, etc. You know, the molecular biology community would have voted against the Human Genome Project because they weren't really thinking in any big way.
Did you enjoy or simply tolerate having to deal with the politics of the Human Genome Project with the?
No, I didn't really get involved in the politics, and you notice I got fired.
Yeah. Well, you dealt with the division of work between DOE and NIH. You dealt with the rebellious molecular biologists.
That was fine. I didn't mind that. You know, my view is I'd rather be head of something than spend most of my time just criticizing the person. So if by luck you can get real power that lets you move science ahead, you know, now for a variety of reasons, most people say they don't want power. They don't want to be at Washington. They don't. That's too bad, because then the decisions are, you know, made by someone who wants to put labels on recombinant, you know, food. you know, by putting the label there, it calls into question there's something wrong. When there was no reason to call anything into question. I think I was aided by the fact that, you know, my mother was a very minor Irish Democrat. But, you know, I saw her as you had to get into politics. And and right now I don't believe we're going to get much more money for our science unless we cure a major disease. So then we'll get it sort of as a reward. You know, I think the world is waiting for us to cure most cancer. If we don't, there'll be reluctance to think we're going to improve their lives. Likewise, we have to stop diabetes too. You know, we really have to have a sense of obligation. And that I find the scientific community is on the whole very parochial. They just somehow think that we're necessary and everyone should support us, and it's going to happen without
something in return.
It can't be without helping them. You know, when you say, well, the last big advance was the Salk vaccine, which isn't true, but you know, it was a big thing because polio really dominated the psychology of the summers, and suddenly it was gone. So there was, you could say, enormous gratitude. You know, and physics got, you know, big machines and everything because they got the bomb before the Germans. Okay, so they gained respect. So we have to not expect that we'll get people liking us because we're necessary. Quote. You know, if we do something.
So rather than me asking you what you've learnt from your career, from the past, what do you want to see done in the future?
Oh, I just like to seek us able to cure, and I mean not really cure, some major forms of cancer. There aren't many people in the scientific community who have that same feeling because they just realize how difficult it is. And so they don't want to, you know, to have unrealistic expectations. My career was based on unrealistic expectations. I just hope there can be more people who just want things to happen fast.